Welcome to the first manual SWOD UCS RES 4 simulation. I am working from two screens, reading from one, videoing the other, which leads to pauses from time to time as I invariably lose my place. Just like then. This simulation may be slightly optimistic about trade, the amount of real estate and cities sold, but could equally be a way short. We're not focused on these variables, rather the general overview of what RES can do. The simulation starts in 2024 with 5 billion in revenue. Let's go to 2024, which is at the top, noticing we move down and up to go past the years. So in 2024 here, at the beginning of what I call the RES calculator, we see that 5 billion. We can see next to it an E of 90%, and we can see there are 8 spins, which generate 26.6 billion in cash flow, 12.8 billion in GDP, 4.8 in government spending, and Labour receives 6.4 billion. How we arrive at these figures goes straight to the core of the RES equation. Revenue times efficiency times spin, as is told in significant detail in the chapter, the RES equation. To summarise, let's move to 2025 and start with the grand total of all revenue seen at C51. So let's move down that year. And the grand total of all revenue, that is here, 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 equals here. This is the grand total of the revenue, and this revenue is then brought to the beginning of the RES calculator. It is then multiplied by E for efficiency of 90%, which is in effect the percentage of this revenue spent at other companies in the same network. This cash flow is then spent before the 25th of February 2025, and the cash flow that remains in the network is free to be spent again come the 26th of February and is allocated back to the first column of the RES calculator, one row below the last. Ready to repeat the process, which is times E again and spent by the 19th of April, reappears, times E again, spent by June the 8th. This process repeats 8 times, and each process is called a spin. 1 second. Each process is called a spin, resulting with a 513 increase in cash flow seen at 041 here, created by the spending and respending of the same money minus E spillage 8 times within a single year. Important to this process is whatever cash flow remains after the last spin is carried forward as revenue in the following year, in action called the LCR, the Law of Conservation of Revenue. You can see that here, that's the last spin, that is brought down to here, copied down, and then is transferred to the following year here, which is then included in the grand total here. And we're back to the example in the previous year where this grand total equals the first part of the RES spin calculator. Okay, now where was I? Cash flow in 2027. Sorry, no, we're not there. Note that in principle, this is a different way of increasing the money supply and comes in place of the reserve rate technique, which increases the money supply more than 1000% in most Western economies. We're not doing anything radically new here, but we are doing it in a different way. Okay, point 3, by 2027, revenue has increased to 8.49 billion. Let's go down there, 2027. Revenue from there, brought in there. By which point both E and spin have increased. Spin is now at 10, E is now at 91. Cash flow is now at 52.4 billion. Next, revenue increases over the following years, and because of this, by 2031, aid is no longer a factor. So let's just see. You see these figures over the left. We're starting with aid of 2 billion there. Goes to 1.5 as other incomes increase and E increases. Goes back down to 1 as others increase. And then more spins are added as E is increased. And you can see by 2030 there's no need for aid at all. Working on the principle there are other networks and it would now be going to them. Other newer networks, I should say. Okay, so let me just get my bearings. Right, by 2032, let's get there. By 2032, revenue is 13.6 billion, E is 95%, and spin is 12. Cash flow is 118.7 billion. 2033 sees a recession warning, and all income from trade and real estate is halved. See here, this is halved the real estate exports. Okay, all of that is halved, but as E is increased to 97 and spin is increased to 14, cash flow continues to increase. We can see last year's cash flow before the warning, 118, and this year's 127. And in general, for the first up until 2050, I have one real objective, and that is for cash flow to never fall. Never want cash flow to fall. Okay, 2034, let's get there. 2034 sees the recession worse and income from trade and real estate is halved again. So you can see now it's only worth 25% of what it was 2 years ago. But as E is increased to 99 and spin is increased to 16, cash flow continues to grow, now 138 billion. Let's just have a look at this below. GDP, government spending and labour's income. GDP, government spending, labour's income are all factors of cash flow. GDP is 50%, so 69 billion. Government spending is 18.75%, or 26 billion. Labour receives 25%, 34 billion. In 2035, the recession eases, exports double, spin is increased to 20, and as a result, cash flow increases significantly to 217 billion. So you see, we've had a recession hit, and yet the Malawi network's done better than it was doing before, just by pumping up that E and increasing the spin. In 2036, the recession ends and exports and real estate city developments increase to pre-recession figures. Spin stays at 20, E decreases to 98, and the objective is to steadily decrease spin and E so that it can be ramped up again next time a recession hits without decreasing cash flow. Point 10. In 2040, let's get there. In 2040, spin is down to 12 and E is down to 95 and cash flow is 298, having increased each year. Exports are a modest 3.4 billion. That would be this. Real estate sales are just below 1 billion. That is this. And city developments bring in 10.75 billion. The main source of revenue is the law of conservation of revenue. In effect, the 13th spin, starting here, copied to here, copy to here, becoming the single biggest portion and over half of all revenue. Over half? Yes. Finding my place. Okay, where after this plus other revenue follow E95 and Śpin 12 creates 296 billion in cash flow and a kitty of 18.3 in LCR funding for 2041, which, as we know, continues to here, is calculated in here and becomes a factor of here. Right, steady progress is then made until another more extreme recession and depression is predicted in 2043. Okay, let's get there. There we see, at which point E is still 97 and Śpin is still 14, and cash flow has increased to, at which point E increases to and Śpin sorry, I need to make these corrections now, otherwise I will not make them. Okay, I'm just actually going to cut that last section out altogether. So I'm going back a second. Steady progress is made until another more extreme recession, depression, is predicted in 2043. We see that here. In reaction to the predicted slowdown estimated by the now highly advanced Angel Wing software, I move E to 97 and Śpin to 14 and increasing cash flow to 444 billion and an estimated 222 billion GDP. System for GDP, as inspired by David A. Moss's A Concise Guide to Macroeconomics, and the Siena Equilibrium spreadsheet tabs 006 and 007, which loosely predicts that cash flow creates a touch over 50% of output GDP. For simplicity, I have factored 50%. Better too low than too high. So that just didn't sound right as I read it, so I'm going to read it again. The system for GDP was inspired by David A. Moss's book, A Concise Guide to Macroeconomics, and the Siena Equilibrium spreadsheet tabs 2006 and 2007, which loosely predict that cash flow creates a touch over 50% of output GDP. For simplicity, I have factored 50%. Better too low than too high. Note that as a further extension to this principle, Labour's cash flow dedicated to housing is half, so that a 200,000 cash flow creates a 100,000 home. It's very counterintuitive, and I may be wrong, but better predict too few houses than too many. However, this thinking also has other connotations, such as should trade goods sold be halved as well. I'm leaving this point for now. In 2044, the recession hits, and in reaction, non-LRC revenue is halved, E increases to 100%, and Śpin increases to 18. In the first year of the recession, cash flow, GDP, government spending increased by 42%. We've gone from 444 cash flow to 631 cash flow as the recession hits. It's kind of showing off now a little bit, but if you've got it, flaunt it. Okay, so in 2045, let's get there. In 2045, the recession worsens, and now I pretty much start to maximize cash flow and show off the spin. As despite income from exports, real estate, and city development stopping completely, 0, 0, 0. In 2046, the Malawi network at spin 20 grows and grows. But this time, when the depression ends at 2047, I keep E at 100%. Just go a few years forward. There we go. I keep E at 100% and spin at 20 and start to focus on reaching 1% of global output by 2050 and an increase in cash flow from 1.2 trillion to 2.87 trillion in 2050. A whole new type of economics. At this point, I started to work on the controller, so I could see snapshots and factors such as social factors, such as social house, production, healthcare, angel wing development funding, and other items. Social house funding is the easiest to work out. Labour receives 25% of cash flow, and 25% of that, being 6.25%, is designated to social housing, but with the personnel owning the houses they paid for. Therefore, social housing cash flow, therefore, if social housing cash flow is 2.87 trillion, divided, therefore social housing cash flow is 2.87 trillion divided by 6.25%, which equals 179 billion, which I divided by $200,000 per property equals 897,000 houses paid for by 2050, and by now most of the whole population is housed in Western standards. Better than Western standards in many cases. Another interesting and simple statistic is the super project income of 93 billion in 2050 and 367 billion so far, found down the AV column on the controller tab. So let's go there. This is the controller tab, and I'm not going to get into it other than to follow the directions. Where we go? We're going to column AV. Here we see Angel Wing software spending, just 3.25% of all spending. And here we can see that 93 made in a year and 367 made so far, of which currently half is dedicated to Angel Wing software, ÇÉCFŚ, and S-World Film. Quite the war chest, especially if repeated again and again in over 50 countries, plus income from virtual networks. Getting back to the display, 2051 to 2080 were in part created as an afterthought, testing different theories. After a deliberate fall in 2050 from 2052 to 2060, I focused on maintaining a balanced cash flow relative to global output, with results shown for convenience back on the controller from BE80 to BE87. Let's find it. BE80. Here we go. BE80. Here we go. This is a network share of global GDP, and we can see it's pretty much static all the way through the 50s, I suppose we call them, yeah, the 50s. And this is just done by small, tiny changes to E. Then from, let's just get there. Okay. Let's see the E there. 99, 98.5, 98.7, 98.55, 98.7, 98.75, 98.8, 98.83. Small changes in E. Okay, so now we're at the next section. From 2060 to 2070, I experimented with acquisition. 1 second. I experimented with acquisition, adjusting E to 93%, dumping most of the highly prized LCR. So you start with 240 billion in LCR and end with a lot less, 67. And that is worked out there. I experimented with acquisition, adjusting E to 93%, dumping most of the highly prized LCR in 2060, creating 222 billion in asset purchase or developing cities in foreign locations, which in turn would create greater export revenue in the long run. Whereafter in 2061 I increase E to 99.5%, and by 1965 LCR is replenished. So we're down, we spend all this on assets and we lose, only got 67 billion left in LCR, but the next year it's back up to 110, following year 149, following year 186, then 219, and again we've got money to spend on assets. In whereafter in 2060, and by 2065 LCR is replenished, and I do the same again, lowering E to 93%, but release 212 billion, this time with a mind on buying just about everything else that was for sale in Malawi. Whereafter, as before, 2066 increases E to 99.5, and by 2070 LCR is replenished again. So let's go to 2070. We go to 2071. I call the last 10 years the peak tent versus a hyper depression, in which I increase E and spin until a slowdown is predicted in 2073. So I'm racking up as much money as I can until the slowdown is predicted, whereafter I increase them some more up to E 99.9 and spin 32 by 2075. Okay, 2075. Until we see two different versions of 2076. This is version 1. In 2076 version 1 and 2, I adjust non-LCR revenue down to 40%. That's just the point here. This would be 0 before. It was 0 in 2045, but now, because we're doing a lot of trading with other countries that are applying res economics, we don't have to worry about those countries not having any demand for our goods. So the loss in revenue is less. Okay, so we got where are we? Whereafter I increase them some more to 99.9, and so I've read that. Okay, in 2026, 1 and 2, I adjust LCR revenue down to 40%, not 100% as in 2045, as now trade is with other res economies that are not affected by the slowdown. In 2076 version 1, E increases to 100% and spin stays at 32. In 2076 version 2, I I adjust E to 97.5, which releases 276 billion into the global economy, and at the same time all other S-World networks follow suit. This plan has been this book, A More Creative Capitalism's finale. This plan was this book's finale a few months past. An automatic action that sees the new strong S-World countries' economies flood the world with cash flow if, say, the USA network companies were in trouble. This is a macro version of the Pete Tent Law. See Backstory and Chapter 2, Superstring Economics / String Theory Systems. The results of this action, if the USA and other previously wealthy countries did not have res economies, or at least res economic zones, was in fact pitiful. A 3.8% boost to the global economy, not worth the risk, not nearly. See Spreadsheet tab, Controller BK110. Let's find that. BK. Here it is. That's all that cash flow dumped from 50 different countries only made a 3.8% difference to the economy. Pitiful. Pitiful. Okay. Where am I? But if the USA and other economies could apply res so that this 3.8% could be spun, so the cash flow and not the revenue was exported, then we could achieve a 70% boost. See over here, 70 or 71% boost to the global economy, more than enough to solve any problems. The last few years just continue with a high E and S in 2080 on controller BE111. BE111. We see Malawi ends with a 2.2 share of global GDP, a cash flow of 16.6 trillion. Let's just see that. Find that here. Having had the capacity to house all its citizens, mostly in mansions, and every other creature comfort that right now seems so far out of reach. One second. Okay. Yes. It's, sorry, postscript. Yes, it's a lot to take in, and one's first instinct would be that there must be an error. God knows I did. But in fact, E 100% and Spin 20 is doing little different to the Fed lowering its reserve rate from 5% to 5%, increasing the money supply by a factor of 2,000%. And that is what governments do. And the network is designed around being an economy, just like a country. Moreover, res is inherently safe relative to decreasing the reserve rate, because at 5%, if 5% of lenders wanted their money in cash and the bank had no one to borrow from, it fails. But in the case of res, the money is always there. Hence the motto, which I'm not going to read in Latin because my Latin sucks, or is basically non-existent, other than finding a few nice phrases here and there. But the motto is, if you know how to use money, money is your slave. If you don't, money is your master. Okay, thank you very much.